The AP seeks restored eligibility for admission to the press pool and limited access press events, untainted by any impermissible viewpoint-based exclusion. That is all this court orders today, for the government to put the AP on an equal playing field as similarly situated outlets, despite the AP's use of disfavored terminology like the Gulf of Mexico. So the court grants that preliminary injunction. The court now, on its own motion, stays, pauses that preliminary injunction through April 13th, so for a week, to provide the government time to seek an emergency stay from a higher court and to prepare to implement the court's injunction. This stay automatically dissolves after April 13th, absent further relief from a court. So I don't know who this judge is, Trevor McFadden, because he strikes me as too reasonable to be a democratically appointed judge. Let's see, who appointed Judge Trevor McFadden? Donald Trump. How could I guess? Of course, this guy's reasonable. Donald Trump appointed him. How funny. If you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself or your family, the good news is that if you defended lawfully, you can be very hard to convict. But did you defend lawfully? Because if you don't know where the actual legal boundaries for self-defense are, it's the easiest thing in the world to innocently step over them, and now you're extremely easy to convict. Good news. In just a single day, you can become an expert on the law of self-defense and make yourself extremely hard to convict. On Saturday, April 26th, I'm holding one of my only twice-a-year full-day law of self-defense advanced classes. This class is taught live by me and live streamed to you. It teaches you everything you need to know in one day, and there's plenty of opportunity for personal Q&A with me as well. Even more good news, when you register today, you save yourself 50% off the standard registration, but that discount ends soon. Your 50% discount and many more details on this advanced class are available just by pointing your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/advanced today. And I'll also drop that link in the description. I look forward to seeing all of you there. So here it is. It's from yesterday, U.S. District Court, District of Columbia. So the Associated Press had been thrown out of the White House press room. I'm actually not sure that's completely true. I'm hearing different information about it. Some people are saying the Associated Press, the AP, had like a permanent seat in the front row, closest to the press secretary, and they've been moved to the back row. Other people are saying they were thrown out completely. And the reason, supposedly they were thrown out, and I think Trump's been very explicit about this, Trump renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And the AP announced, we're going to ignore that. We're going to continue to call it the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, Trump doesn't think much of the AP anyway. I mean, there are a bunch of, AP stands for all propaganda. They're just, contemptible left-wing mouthpiece propagandists for the progressive woke DEI agenda. So when they kind of, taunted Trump or spit in his face metaphorically by saying, we don't care what the president says, we're going to keep calling it the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of America, Trump said, fine, then you're out of the press room. Well, you're not really allowed to do that if you're the government. So that's what's called viewpoint discrimination, and that's not lawful under the First Amendment. There are rules you can make up for, who should be allowed in the press room and who shouldn't be allowed. You could say only American journalists, for example, I guess. But what the government can't do is discriminate based on the political viewpoint of a person. So you can't say, we're not going to let the AP in because we don't like their political viewpoint on the whole Gulf of America thing. That's not a hard decision for a judge to make. And Trump, they didn't try to hide it. They weren't like, they could have said, oh, hey, we investigated. It turns out all the AP reporters, they all associate with terrorists. So there's a security risk. That's why we're not letting them in. That would not be a viewpoint reason for denying them access or preferred access to the press room. But the White House just said, oh, you're not going to call it Gulf of America? We don't like you for that. You're out. Clearly viewpoint discrimination. So I'm just going to get to the end of this guy's order. As he says here, First Amendment viewpoint discrimination. I think his conclusion is only like a paragraph, and I'm willing to read that. So this is a federal district trial court in the District of Columbia Circuit. Because this court describes the present motion under a First Amendment rubric, it need not reach some other claims that the Associated Press made. Skip that. The government has not requested AP post a bond. That's fine. The government repeatedly characterizes the AP's request as a demand for extra special access. But that is not what the AP is asking for and not what this court orders. All the AP wants, all it gets is a level playing field. So the court's not saying you got to put them in the front row. The AP journalists seek access to a forum opened by the White House on the same terms as other journalists. In framing things otherwise, the government fails to fully engage with the forum analysis and retaliation case law. So he doesn't like that the White House isn't engaging with the actual core argument here. Rather than grappling with the implication of these doctrines, the government tries to sidestep them. The government may pursue their favored litigation tactics, but this court must address the merits of the relief requested, which is 100% fair. Probably the White House couldn't win on the merits because viewpoint discrimination is such black letter First Amendment law. They had to dance around the edges. The AP seeks restored eligibility for admission to the press pool and limited access press events, untainted by any impermissible viewpoint-based exclusion. That is all this court orders today, for the government to put the AP on an equal playing field as similarly situated outlets, despite the AP's use of disfavored terminology like the Gulf of Mexico. This court does not order the government to grant the AP permanent access to the Oval Office, the East Room, or any other media event. It does not bestow special treatment on the AP. Indeed, the AP is not necessarily entitled to the first in line every time permanent press pool access it enjoyed previously. But it cannot be treated worse than its peer wire services either. The court merely declares that the AP's exclusion has been contrary to the First Amendment, and it enjoins the government from continuing down that lawful path. So the White House shall immediately rescind the denial of the AP's access to the Oval Office, Air Force One, and other limited spaces based on the AP's viewpoint when such spaces are made open to other members of the White House press pool. The White House shall immediately rescind their viewpoint-based denials of the AP's access to events open to other all credentialed White House journalists. This preliminary injunction shall remain in effect until further order of the court, and there's no security bond. The White House didn't ask for a security bond. But what I found really interesting about all this is the judge issued this order, which I think is a perfectly legitimate order. I think it's soundly within the First Amendment. You know, Trump can't do everything he wants to do. That wouldn't be reasonable. Whoops. But the same judge, as soon as he issued that injunction, which I think is perfectly reasonable, immediately stayed his own injunction right afterwards in case the White House wants to appeal the injunction to a higher court. The court and the White House did not ask for this, for this pause in the injunction. The court granted the AP's preliminary injunction request to stop the government, the White House, from denying the AP access to the Oval Office, Air Force One, and all that other stuff. So the court grants that preliminary injunction. The court now, on its own motion, pauses that preliminary injunction through April 13th, so for a week, to provide the government time to seek an emergency stay from a higher court and to prepare to implement the court's injunction. This stay automatically dissolves after April 13th, absent further relief from a court. So I don't know who this judge is, Trevor McFadden, because he strikes me as too reasonable to be a democratically appointed judge. Let's see, who appointed Judge Trevor McFadden? Donald Trump. How could I guess? Of course, this guy's reasonable. Donald Trump appointed him. How funny. That is funny that it's so easy to predict these things. Denver says, with regards to the AP story, the White House can simply let them into some rooms and assign them a seat in the rear of the room. The press secretary can then never call on them. They have to wear a tall dunce cap. All right, next, $5 super chat. Watch Trump let the AP back in, but they'll have to sit in the back and ignore all their questions. You know, would they go back to Judge McFadden and say, Your Honor, they're still discriminating against us. They call on every other wire service and never us. Would that be viewpoint discrimination? I mean, if I were Judge McFadden, I'd really appreciate it if the White House didn't put me in the position of having to rule on something like that, because it sure looks like viewpoint discrimination. I think Trump could get away with it personally, like in the Oval Office. He's constantly telling reporters, I didn't call on you. Be quiet. Oh my God, he's so funny. What a time to be alive. America is blessed, man. We were blessed in our founders, and we have been blessed with this president. For sure, for sure.